This is episode 8 of Consensus on Reality. Today we have the pleasure of having Joshua Cutchin on. He is the author of several really interesting specific books on UFOs, abductions, and fairy lore. The Brimstone Deceit, The Trojan Feast, and others. And most recently, he is the co-author of a great new book on the Bigfoot Phenomenon, Where the Footprints End, with Timothy Renner. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the Bigfoot thing, and then we'll move on into talking about UFOs and the UFO culture.
As one does, of course.
Cool. So, how you doing? Are you doing well today, Josh? Are you good?
Yeah. I'm doing well. It's been a very 2020 season of life, you know.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, obviously, can I curse?
Yeah. We'll run it.
Okay. So obviously things are fucked at like the macrocosm level, right? But the more people I talk to, the more it seems like that has just trickled down and siphoned down into their own lives as well. So
yes.
I've had a bit of a harrowing couple of weeks, but and I'll talk more openly about it at some point. But the good news is everybody's okay. Families are intact. People are still alive. Everything's fine. So, yeah.
I think we're seeing a lot of that. I mean, my life, I think, Dave, your life is a little, you're having some stress with stuff, right?
It kind of just seems like everybody's used to it at this point.
Yeah.
That's the good old US of A.
Yeah, I was talking to some of my friends, and I kind of wonder if, like, a lot of us, not me, because I just had my moment, but personally, but I kind of wonder if a lot of us aren't 2020-ing right. You know what I mean? Like, maybe this is the time when we go through the fire and we, come out reborn.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. We're all going to be phoenixes this year.
Yeah. I hope so. Well, maybe. I don't know. Is that
No,
do I want to be a phoenix? All right. Cool. So let's dive into Bigfoot land, I guess.
Yeah. Let's start with the big guy.
So how did you didn't start out being like a Bigfoot person, did you? You kind of, or how'd you get into the Bigfoot thing?
I mean, I kind of did in a lot of ways. Not in terms of my writing so much,
right?
But in terms of like my interests, as a kid. For me, for the longest time, the only thing that I really thought was real in the grand scheme of things was the cryptozoological field, because that has science behind it, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's all super sciencey. And there's a lot of good science with some people who study Bigfoot prints and whatnot. This was before I sort of got clued into the fact that the alien abduction experience might not be what people think it is. It might have something to do with altered states, and this was also before I had some ghost phenomena that I'd run into as well. Even though I sort of always had a soft spot for that. But I kind of did start off in some ways as a Bigfoot kid, because I was always into monster movies.
Right.
I just love creature features.
Yeah.
So but it hadn't really featured very prominently in a lot of my work. I mean, just sort of here and there, it was like an afterthought. There'd never been like a Bigfoot book.
Right.
And now after writing between Timothy and I about 200,000 words.
Wow. Yeah.
We didn't want to make it 2 books. We wanted to do 1 book, but we're just like, there's no way we can put out 1 giant book like this.
Yeah.
So after writing that much, I may be done with Bigfoot again for a while, because
right.
I honestly, like, after volume 2 drops, I really don't know what else I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
It ended up being such a comprehensive thing that I mean, I'm kind of firmly in the weird Bigfoot camp, which is something that I was very hesitant to do a long time ago. But here I am, and again, 200,000 words. That's over 2 of my normal books that we have put together.
Right.
And I've described it multiple times like drinking through a hose, and and it's not. I mean, it is comprehensive, but it's not. I mean, if we wanted to include everything that we found in there, it would be another 2 or 3 books,
Right.
Just in terms of cases that back up the things, the motifs and the patterns that we're seeing. So yeah. But at the same time, like I don't know really what else I'm going to say about Bigfoot. I mean, there might be some things in here that could be picked apart a little bit more in depth, but as far as anything original, I think I'm tapped out. I think I'm tapped out on Bigfoot. Yeah.
Are you sick of talking about Bigfoot yet?
I literally just texted Tim and I was like, I'm super proud of these books. Maybe the proudest of any of my stuff. Maybe, I'm not sure, but but I said, aren't you really looking forward to talking about something else for a while? So we're just wrapping up editing, and it should be. I think that it's still reasonable to entertain the idea of a late 2020 release.
Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, the first volume's great. It's got I guess we should mention the subtitle being high-strangeness and the Bigfoot Phenomenon. That being sort of the angle of this podcast, right?
Right.
The high-strangeness thing. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, like I said, I've never really wanted to be in that sort of paranormal Bigfoot category, but it just, if you're being honest with a lot of the stuff, it looks like that. I was talking to someone else the other day who was like, well, when people say that Bigfoot disappears, maybe they're not familiar with the terrain, and maybe it just jumped into a ditch, and maybe this and maybe that, and that is possible, but there are plenty of cases where that's not what's going on, because people know the land really well.
Yeah.
There are plenty of cases also where people literally see these things wink out of existence. Like they didn't even blink and it's gone. It just disappears. But the thing that really bothered me about that line of thought is that you keep on walking that logic back and you end up at, you just saw a bear. That's where that line of logic ends up.
Right.
If you keep on doubting what people have seen.
Yeah.
So it just is one of those things that I can't go back to the flesh and blood thing now. It's like some sort of weird Bigfoot gnosis, I guess.
Yeah. I really love that idea of the Bigfoot being sort of like a metaphysical totem that people encounter. Do you think that like these encounters possibly are about some sort of like disconnect we're experiencing with nature in the moment?
Well, I've talked to a couple people about like how there really is a Bigfoot moment going on right now in pop culture. I mean, you're seeing. I would argue that the ubiquity of Bigfoot now is kind of like the way that the gray alien image was, infecting everything in the 90s.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be sitting in traffic and I'll see, I would say probably an average of one person every 2 days with a Bigfoot bumper sticker or something.
Sure, yeah.
So there is sort of Bigfoot's having a moment right now, which I don't think was intentional on our part. I think maybe we were sort of at the beginning of that wave when we decided to write this.
Right.
But yeah, I've sort of played with the idea that that these things respond to what we're doing to ourselves and to our reality and to our environment. If we run with that idea of the gray aliens being so popular in the 90s, and we sort of put that in a continuum from the atomic age, it's almost like they're the avatar of concern about the atom bomb and whatnot.
Right.
And now in an age where nuclear destruction is less of a threat, and we're kind of our own, things like just environmental issues are more of a threat in a lot of ways than those geopolitical things. I know we can talk about China. I totally agree, but I'm saying I'm saying we don't have that sort of Damocles over our head with the nuclear bomb like we used to.
Totally. Yeah.
And your mileage may vary on a lot of environmental causes, and I'm sympathetic to people who are critical of that. But at the same time, I think we all agree that Mother Nature is pissed off about something with,
totally. Yeah.
Wildfires and just, all the stuff that's going on. It seems like a new disaster every day. So maybe there is some sort of Gaian response mechanism. Maybe Bigfoot's like a white blood cell or there are plenty of people who think that Bigfoot is a guardian of the forest sort of character. And it would make sense that as we're sort of, at the end of our environmental rope, this archetype is emerging again. Now, whether or not that means that it's an objective reality outside of us, or it's somehow Jungian or something, I don't know. I'm open to a lot of different interpretations, and I'm still sympathetic. Excuse me, more so than Tim, to the flesh and blood hypothesis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially, the kind of way that I like to have my cake and eat it too is invoking Mike Clelland's research with owls. Like, obviously owls are real creatures, but sometimes the owls are strange. So maybe there is a pocket of flesh and blood Bigfoot, and whatever this other intelligence is picks up on that, just as it picks up on other wildlife to make, to have these strange encounters.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Again, that's the way I like to have my cake and eat it too. I don't think it's entirely fair, but it's worth entertaining.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, there's so many situations, I think, that garner both of those thought processes. But I'm curious, do you engage a lot of like local stories? Do you get a lot of local accounts to you personally?
It's one of the reasons that I'm really glad that I ended up partnering with Tim on this, is because I have a giant gaping hole in my body of researches, and it's basically that I don't do field work. I never really have. I'm sort of the guy who likes to look at connections, and will drive hours upon hours to go find something in a library that I can't find that's out of print somewhere. But in terms of like doing that or collecting stories, I'm really not that guy. I would like to be that guy, because I think it would really keep me energized and engaged. And I've before the lockdown went into effect, I was sort of planning on getting a little bit more engaged with field work. But for me, no, not so much. Having said that, there is a really great Bigfoot museum about an hour and a half north that has really acted as a real vacuum cleaner for a lot of things in the area. And I would even go so far as to argue that perhaps Bigfoot activity in the area has increased because they put up a museum. Right. That reactive aspect of the phenomena. It was David Metcalf who was like, they made a temple to Bigfoot. It's in an area that already had sightings. It's a place for believers to gather. It's a place for unbelievers to be converted. It houses sacred relics.
Right.
Yeah.
And and so they put it in this place of power, and because of that, there's some sort of a reciprocated psychosocial something going on that's making the phenomena manifest more. I like that idea. Because it's just weird. It's just so weird, and that's why I love it. Yeah.
Do you think like you experience any of that sort of feedback in writing these books and stuff? Do you notice anything in your own life?
So there was a time when I was writing a Trojan Feast where I would have a lot of different synchronicities. I was at one point woken up in the middle of the night. My parents and I had gone to the beach with my wife, and they had gone home a night early, and I got a phone call from my folks' home telephone number. Actually, no, it was from my mom's cell phone is what it was. And I answered it, and it was this very, Mothman Prophecies-esque robotic voice that was like,
wow.
And I called her back. I couldn't figure it out, and I hung it up, and I called her back, and there was no call from her phone. So it could have been anything, I guess.
Yeah.
This is a little bit difficult for me to talk about at the moment. I am going through a period that has had a lot of synchronicity, like an absurd amount of really profound synchronicity, and it's still sort of a little bit of a touchy subject. But long story short, I have a little gnome statue that I bought on a vacation in the mountains, and you attach it to a tree, and it just sits there like a little gnome looking out from around the tree. And you can, if somebody wants to troll my Facebook photos, you'll probably find it. But it disappeared for a couple days. Like, it just wasn't there. And I was like, I figured it had fallen off, and we have a lot of leaf cover in our backyard, and I need to go look for it. And I went away for about 10 days, and I come home, and the darn thing sitting in a really obvious spot at a forked tree in my backyard. And that forked tree just so happens to be where I buried a silver coin as a fairy offering when I first got to the house.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? My wife didn't do it. That's what I can say.
Wow.
But
Right.
so it's yeah.
That's an amazing anecdote.
Yeah.
It's a good little synchronicity.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've long story short, I have experienced some of those things, but they have been pretty few and far between. And for whatever reason, I have my suspicions, but for whatever reason, the past 4 weeks have just been mired in symbolism and all sorts of stuff that I'll be sharing with people more in the future.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing is I kind of don't want to talk about it because I don't want it to stop.
Right. Totally.
And it has sort of started to taper down a little bit anyway. So it's like, Jim, let's keep this ball rolling. It's so fun to live in a magical universe.
Yeah,
Totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Whenever I'm in I've had maybe 3 or 4 of those weird little stretches of time where everything is so charged with I don't know what that is. I guess it's some kind of magic. And you don't want. It's you're scared of it, but you're also so excited.
Yeah. And some of the stuff, it's just their synchronicities are just like dreams because they mean the world to you, and the people that you tell do not give a shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the gnome statue one's good, but I have some others that are just mind-boggling to me because something that I was thinking over and over randomly in the day sort of manifested.
Right.
I'll give you an example. I was talking with a friend saying that I was sort of disappointed with the work of some other people because it felt like I was one of the ants in a room full of grasshoppers, as a reference to the Aesop's fables, and I have this running tally of things I need to teach my sons in the back of my head because everybody's making more media, and everybody's, I think about all the, the old black and white movies that I've seen, just all these things that I need to share with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I got stuck on Aesop's fables that day, and I was trying to list the ones that I could remember in my head. And I was just like, man, Aesop's fables, where did I learn about Aesop's fables? Did I learn it from here? Did I learn it from there? Was it a TV show? Was it a book? Oh, Lord, that's something else I need to teach the kids, Aesop's fables. And I was walking with them in the stroller, and I'm like, Aesop's fables, man, I've got to write that down to make sure, because there's so many good life lessons in there. So I talked to my mom that night, and they're on vacation at the beach, and she says, hey, just so you know, I picked up a book at the bookstore down here at the beach for the boys. It's Aesop's fables.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's that, but that's a perfect example of it will never strike as resonant for someone that I tell that to as it will for me, because I was inside my head that day and I was obsessing over that, and the odds that my mom would have just picked that out of thin air are astronomical.
Right.
So
yeah, it almost feels like you're not even working with probability at that point. It's some kind of something else. Yeah.
I mean, she could have grabbed, I don't know. She could have grabbed
just anything.
Anything else. Like Uncle Remus, or the Native American folk tales for children, or any number of things, but that's what she ended up grabbing. So it's wild.
Totally.
Yeah.
So another thing I've heard you mention previously is which I'm really interested in, is this sort of Rorschach effect of experiences, and maybe the blue dress, white dress, and people sort of remembering experiences drastically differently, Is this something that you're seeing a lot, where people are sharing experiences together and sort of having a different collective memory of it?
Well, it's one of those things. Science often talks about how fickle memory is, and the fact that every time you remember something, you're remembering your last memory of it. So you end up getting that piece of paper that's had too many. It's been through the Xerox machine too many times.
Yeah.
It sort of starts to get blurry and covered in artifacts.
Yeah.
And honestly, there are some traumatic things that have happened to me that I've kind of done that sort of rewriting thing deliberately, and I still have a memory of what actually happened, but I don't feel it experientially like I normally would.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, it really is problematic. the whole Rorschach test thing that I see in the paranormal is just so tied into what people are predisposed to believe, and the lengths that they'll go to. I'll never forget. It was somebody was speaking with Linda Moulton Howe about how those black helicopters that you see around the cattle mutilation sites aren't really black helicopters. They are UFOs that have shapeshifted into black helicopters. And I'm sympathetic to that idea, but that's really as a bridge too far. I mean, like can we at least approach it from the idea that it's actually a helicopter first,
right? Yeah.
Before we go ahead and do that. And the obvious and most egregious example is the missing 411 thing.
Yeah.
It's so funny for me to listen to people who are on the extraterrestrial hypothesis bandwagon and then want to lump missing 411 stuff into it and be like, oh yeah, so I guess like ETs can change the weather now,
right?
Yeah.
Or they can, they have all these things that fit into existing models. So, I say that missing 411 is a Rorschach test, and I say that with complete knowledge of the irony of the fact that I'm going to say that fairy faith is the thing that explains missing 411 more than anything.
Right.
Because I'm at least reflexive enough to realize that yes, I'm proving my own rule here.
Yeah.
But Bigfoot doesn't change weather. Bigfoot doesn't. So aliens are abducting people who are wearing bright clothing, or like Bigfoot cares about what people's last names are, or it really does suggest to me something that is operating on more of a, honestly, just a magical level. It's throwing that word around, I know, but it's the idea that we have our own reality, and we have another reality that mirrors and is, to that reality, things like symbolism are important.
Right.
Is kind of where I've settled for a while. Kind of upset at myself for having settled there, because I feel like if you're not constantly like reevaluating your thinking, you're sort of stagnating. But it's really hard for me to get away from this idea of a spirit ecosystem. That was a really roundabout way of answering your question, even if I didn't even answer it. I don't know.
I think we got back there perfectly.
No, yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where I'm always baffled when people are upset about the idea that things like Bigfoot or aliens might be some sort of reified, some sort of physicalized manifestation of the collective unconscious. Like, and they get upset about that. Like, that's somehow not super miraculous in and of itself. You know what I mean? It's still crazy, wild, anomalous. Whenever people like push back on them, I'm like, are you really that married to little green men that you that idea is unpalatable? Because actually, that kind of sounds a lot more interesting to me, honestly.
Yeah, totally.
But again, I try to be non-dogmatic about this stuff.
I think you have to be.
Yeah. Or you end up losing it. It's sort of like if you want to rework that famous phrase from The Dark Knight, you either die a hero or you live long enough to become a villain. I mean, so you either, stay agnostic or you end up batshit crazy. I think is what it really comes down to.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish it wasn't. I mean, I wish there was a way to find like real answers in this, but so far it doesn't seem like that's happening anytime soon, like real answers.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, that really underscores how personal this stuff is.
Right.
I think it is a personal journey. People are always yammering around about disclosure when they don't realize. I mean, this sounds super cheesy, but I actually mean it. That the real disclosure is inside you. The real disclosure is in your heart. I was talking with Whitley Strieber about this, and we both agree that it's not about the government telling you that these things are real. It's about you either having your own experience or you Goldilocksing your way through the logic of this and being like, oh, there's something behind this. And you have that own knowledge of this. You know that these things are real, and you don't need to be told by some authority figure.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think in that spirit, to me, it seems like a lot of our listeners might, come from like suburban life or city life, and I think for them, like digesting something like ETs or ufology is sort of coming into the vogue of like the collective consciousness, where like Bigfoot, I feel like a lot of people might find it a little bit harder to believe because they've never experienced anything close to that. So is there sort of like what would be like one of the best examples that you've come across that has been like has just given you evidence that there is something to this phenomenon?
Well, just to sort of touch on that a little bit, what you said to begin with, it really is striking to me that people, have a more difficult time wrapping their heads around some of these things. And I think that might have something to do with the fact that, like, look, I'm sitting here in suburban Atlanta, and I can tell you, magic be thin here. Like, magic is real thin. Like, there's just, you don't feel it. But, if you go, 2 hours up the road to the mountains, or, I mean, heck, even from here, I can get you in the middle of nowhere in about 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And you just feel it. It just sort of covers you like a warm blanket.
Yeah.
And that was the funny thing about writing this book is that, I found myself siding with the Bigfoot skeptics a lot. Because there really are rather a lot of problems with the flesh and blood hypothesis. And to me that, I'm still believing witnesses, but I'm saying like, the things, the holes that skeptics poke in the Bigfoot phenomena are a lot stronger and a lot bigger, I think, than the holes that they poke in spirit phenomena or UFO phenomena. Because if you're jumping on that physicalized bandwagon, you've got to be prepared to answer the fact of why there aren't any bodies. And I mean, yes, people will say that people don't run into bear carcasses or cougar carcasses in the wild. I get that, I know that, but they have. At some point they have. So to your point about a specific encounter that really sort of emphasizes the reality of these things. It's interesting. In volume 2, we have 2 case studies of people whose Bigfoot encounters are really exemplary of all the weird stuff we've talked about in both volumes. But as far as, are you looking for something that's like evidential based or something like a really a witness of high caliber, or exactly what are you looking for from me? I'm also stalling because I'm trying to remember some of my favorite cases.
No, that's fine. I feel like I always want to take care of like the total skeptic listener, like I feel like I always want to have I don't know, something for them, but maybe I should just stop catering.
So here's the ironic thing is that, I wrote Where the Footprints In with Tim about like all these weird Bigfoot encounters. But the first thing when somebody wants to be convinced that there's something lying behind the phenomena is I'm going to press a book in their hands. Mm-hmm. And that book is going to be from the Flesh and Blood Bigfoot camp. And that book is Jeff Meldrum's Bigfoot Legend Meets Science. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is an absolutely amazing book, because you have this guy who is a professor of Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. Sorry, I always get that mixed up. Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. It's Meldrum is a professor at Idaho State University. He specializes in primate locomotion, and he walks you through the ways that these footprints, some specific examples of them, have stuff that you would not see in a human footprint, and if you were going to hoax them, you'd have to have some profound knowledge of primate anatomy. I'm talking about things specifically like, the mid-tarsal break in primates. There's actually a flexible center point. Yeah. There are things like there's this condition known as Celtic foot or Morton's foot, where the second toe is longer than the first toe, and it occurs in 10% of the human population, and it also occurs in 10% of these Bigfoot footprints, which is like, that's an interesting little, And then, of course, the dermal ridges. I mean, the thing is that these things kind of feel a little bit passé in the supernatural community because they've been talked about for so long, but the science is really, really strikingly good on this.
Yeah.
And that does imply that there is a physicality to this phenomena,
right?
And that's your gateway drug,
right?
And that's what gets your foot in the door. And then, of course, it does fall apart when you start asking things about like breeding populations and people finding or not finding corpses. And the thing that people have to eventually wrap their head around. And this is a really tough thing. I get it, because we've been raised to not think this way, but you have to wrap your head around the fact that imaginary and imaginal are not the same thing. And that just because something's non-physical doesn't mean it can't have physical implications in the real world.
Right.
If you look at, a lot of people say, well, Bigfoot can't be a ghost, or Bigfoot can't be non-physical because it leaves footprints. And that's just shockingly ignorant of the tradition of ghost hunting, where one of the first techniques to prove a haunting was to, spread talcum powder on the floor and wait for footprints to emerge.
Right.
You've got poltergeist cases where something is writing on the mirror in red lipstick or charcoal or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, if you really want to get granular and super scientific, look at psi phenomena. I mean, that is, I'm not gonna gun to my head, I'm not gonna tell you that that whatever lies behind the UFO phenomena is real, or Bigfoot is real, or Nessie, or any of this stuff. But a hill that I will die on is psi phenomena and psi research. It is so well done, and it is so well done at a very specific level that if it were any other topic, we wouldn't even be having the conversation about whether or not it's real or not. And once you look at that set of data and you say, well, psi phenomena are obviously non-physical, they're in your head, but they can have an influence on the real world, then it becomes a lot easier to say, well, maybe Bigfoot is something that is non-physical but can leave physical imprints. And of course people say, well, what about blood and droppings and hair? And then my response to that is, well, UFOs leave behind this angel hair substance from time to time, which literally, in the cases where they've tried to collect it, has evaporated from like an enclosed jar. And then you've got to look at the robust history of seances, which, I mean, a lot of them were bunk, of course, but not all of them. And you had things like ectoplasm, which were another physical manifestation. It's like Sarai over at Where Did the Road Go often says about the whole Uri Geller spoon bending thing is like, just because people can fake a punch for a movie or for a television show doesn't mean that all punches are fake. You can fake these things, but it doesn't mean that like the act itself never happens. That's sort of where I am.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's great. Maybe we move on into talking a little bit about what's happening right now with UFO world. What do you think? I mean, let's just start with like this whole like every 2 weeks we get a little bit of disclosure. What's going on with that?
I mean, it's like a fart in a hurricane, isn't it? I mean, no one's noticing, no one's giving a shit.
Yeah, no one cares. What's up with that?
The thing that constantly bothers me is the story came out about non-terrestrial craft coming out, and everybody's like, oh, the Pentagon says that it has recovered off-world vehicles, and I'm like, that's literally not at all what was said. That's what Eric Davis said. The Pentagon did not say that, but that's what they ran with. And it's interesting, a lot of the people a lot of the people that I talk to, a lot of the normies, so to speak, the vibe that I've been getting from them is that they are actually really skeptical of that particular claim, even without even setting aside the fact that it's been misattributed. A lot of the people that I've talked to are really skeptical of that still to this day. And I think that they're barking up the wrong tree. My friend Red Pill Junkie, prefers to look at retrieved crash materials much more along the lines of, again, apports, some of the things you find in poltergeist cases that just seemingly materialize out of nowhere. I think that might be a little bit more accurate. But again, also the number of people that I talk to, who like the first thing they say is, "I don't think it's aliens. I think it's interdimensional." It's like because well, I mean, so like, look, pre-TTSA, and I'm still a neophyte at this. It still boggles my mind that A Trojan Feast was just released like 5 years ago. It feels like it's been an absolute lifetime. But even in the time since I've got involved, it seemed like from when I got involved in the community really in like 2015 until like the day before the TTSA announcements, it felt like there was a real sloughing off of a lot of this old ETH stuff. And it felt like people were much more open to ideas of hypotheses rather, like interdimensionality or something non-physical, just non-materialist, non-physicalist ideas. And then TTSA comes along, and then everybody's back on this physical nuts and bolts spacecraft train.
Right.
Yeah.
Bob Lazar comes back out, and it's just
yeah.
And a lot of people have been,
they wheel him back out. Yeah.
They're wheeling back. Yeah. And a lot of people have been a lot of people have been trying to sort of read between the lines about all this, and sometimes I wonder if like one of the purposes of this was just that the community was kind of a little bit on the right track, and this is just another way to revert us, to throw us back to the 50s in terms of our thinking on the subject matter. But I don't know. I mean, I tried to point these things out on UFO Twitter and ended up getting vague death threats. So I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. Of all the things to get that upset about,
right? It's not worth that. Yeah.
The fact that I say that it might not be craft to someone who like keeps on using the word crafts, which isn't a freaking word. The fact that I say that it might not be alien aircraft is warrants that sort of reaction. It's just, it speaks to the mental instability of the community, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, totally.
What's y'all's take on TTSA?
Well, I mean, I think more or less it's some combination of like, I don't know, I guess the word would be psyop, or with like a money grab kind of situation. I think it's very cynical.
It's hard to
go ahead. Sorry, no, it's all you.
No worries. It's hard to make heads or tails of it. I think somebody pokes around and then something gets leaked, but it's like you said. I mean, the headline was not even really the story. It was just kind of manufactured in itself.
Yeah, what I find so frustrating is the way that people in the UFO community have willfully ignored the fact that we are in the opening stages of a Cold War with China, and they're not even paying attention to that being a factor.
Absolutely, yeah.
It really boggles the mind that they're that myopic and so obsessed with UFOs that they see this and they don't even think, again, seeing the history of the way that the UFO community has been used as cover for all sorts of different government activities,
right? That
they don't see that this might fit into that somehow,
right?
Yeah,
or even be like, even be maybe the message isn't even for the UFO community. Maybe the release of the Tic Tac videos, which don't get me started on the fact that they've been around forever.
Yeah.
Maybe that was more for the global leaders than it was for the UFO community. Like, look at what we got here. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Maybe they have a better ability to read between the lines than we do. So, I'm not saying that it's not. Again, you bring this stuff up and you're a heretic. And I'm not even, I'm not saying that that's the case. For all I know, it could be literally an alien spaceship that I could go up and knock on.
Right,
maybe that's what we're seeing in that footage. But it's just more of the same old. And again, it's not like I'm, I've been in the field for 20 or 30 years. I'm jaded at 5 years in. It's like if you're paying attention and the history of what's been going on.
Yeah,
just like the big revelation that the Pentagon has been studying this. It's like,
right,
it's part of a tradition of them studying these things. And if you didn't assume that anyway, like, how am I? Where are you?
It reminds me a lot of like the the Majestic 12 papers type stuff. Like, just like it has the same vibe of like, I mean, like it's really exciting. And whenever something's like really exciting and makes a lot of sense, it's like, I don't know.
You know, that's the really kind of ironic thing about where I am is like, if you brought me on for a Roswell roundtable or an MJ12 roundtable or a Bob Lazar roundtable, I would have dick to contribute. Like I would, because these topics have been just bludgeoned to death,
right? Totally.
Even if they are true, they're so tainted by so much controversy.
Right.
I just haven't made myself a student of studying them.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
Now, that's not that I'm ignorant of it. I know the broad strokes, but when it comes down to parsing out whether they're real or not, I tend to just side with people that I know. I tend to respect the opinions of people that I know who are more in depth in it. Then I know the arguments for and against the reality of these things, but it's not something that I think anybody needs to spend more time on. I don't think it's getting anybody closer to the truth.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too, because the language in the most recent story involving names like Marco Rubio, and it seems more like it was from a defense point of view. It's interesting you mentioned the potential Cold War with China and stuff like that, and or what's already in progress.
Lukewarm war.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. But I do think that we, as a UFO community, we're so enthusiastic, and it's just we keep on looking at the wrong things,
Yeah.
I think what do you have a I think something that happened, I guess it was 2016 or so, that what was Above Majestic, the really famous the big, who is that? Is that Corey Good? That whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
Wilcox, too, right?
Wilcox, yeah.
And that was huge. Just like people that I knew that didn't really follow UFOs, like were kind of like into this, like as like an intro to UFOs. And so, I mean, because basically by the end, it's a QAnon like propaganda film, more or less. And I think that there's a lot of crossover between like that world and the UFO world right now. That is, I think it's pretty like dangerous, and it's definitely crumbling some of the UFO allegiances that may have existed before.
Yeah. Where are you guys on with the Q stuff? Because I got somebody texted me, or not texted me, but messaged me a while back, and was like, "Hey, we're doing a QAnon show. If you think Bigfoot ties into this at all, let me know." And it's like,
yeah, no,
okay.
Yeah, I'm very anti Q.
We're not really there at all.
But I follow it because I like to know what's up, and it's like the main thread of the conspiracy culture right now. So I follow it, but I think it's like dangerous and like not even that like well crafted like propaganda.
Yeah, it's I'm spacing on this because I'm not big into the whole conspiracy culture. I don't have any. I don't want to say I don't have any opinion on Q. I think that it's mostly bunk. But I think like all sort of misinfo and disinfo, there's probably some nuggets of truth in there.
Well, that's the thing. I think like there's always a small element of truth that makes like these things interesting in the first place. It's got to blossom from somewhere. You know?
That's where I'm at too.
But it's I don't know.
But there's this podcast I was listening to called The Farm. It's a conspiracy podcast.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was talking about, and again, I don't have all my, I don't have my recall is not as good with conspiracy stuff because I generally don't go in too far deep into it. Like, give me a conspiracy document or give me a dusty old tome from, 19th century Ireland.
Yeah.
I tell you which one I'm going to be looking at.
That's right.
But one of the generals who has come out, I think, in support of Q is also someone who was involved in sort of this fourth generation warfare stuff, which is kind of an interesting point of comparison.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I mean, it's weird. Like we're in it's 2020, 2019 and 2020. It's like this conspiracy theories are just so mainstream.
Yeah.
Right.
It's right. It's intense.
And like anything that's mainstream, it got ruined.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Except, I mean, well, I can't think of any good exceptions. Maybe like
I don't know.
McDonald's.
Yeah, maybe poutine or something. But
Right.
you know, I mean, the internet already ruined bacon and Krampus. So I mean,
Yeah.
like, you know, I was big into Star Wars. I mean, I still enjoy it, and I still know way too much about the now canceled expanded universe and all that bullshit. But,
Yeah.
But you know, there was a definite moment around where Disney bought it. Like, you know, I grew up like being made fun of for.
Yeah.
I grew up being made fun of for knowing what a Mandalorian was. And,
Yeah.
Right.
and now it's like, oh, have you seen the man? It's like, oh God, we gonna do this?
Right.
You know, it's not even a fake versus real thing. It's just like I was there, you know, the entire time while Star Wars was just the nerdy thing, and now it's as mainstream as football. Like, oh, you're into Star Wars, you're not a nerd anymore. You're just a person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So something we've mentioned, I think, going back to sort of, you know, I know you said you don't know too much about Q, and I guess we probably don't know too much about it either. But
I know everything.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
I think we've mentioned sort of this idea of hoaxing, and how hoaxing sort of creates a sigil and becomes a phenomena within itself. I was just curious what your thoughts on that might be.
No, I mean, I think that's really prescient. There's a section. So in Where the Footprints in Volume 2, I have a chapter that's dedicated to the George P. Hansen model of the trickster and the paranormal, because it's a great book.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not the easiest book to get through.
Right.
It reads a bit like a doctoral dissertation or something. But it's a great book, and he keeps on mentioning Bigfoot in the book, and he never like really goes anywhere with it. So there's a trickster chapter in Volume 2 where the footprints end, and one of the sections in that is sort of, you know, like looking at this idea of, you know, the fake it till you make it sort of thing. Mm-hmm. You know, there are people. I think it's Paul Freeman, I believe is his name, who was practically caught faking footprints, but also has some of the best Bigfoot footage outside of the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Right.
And, you know, if you look at things like, y'all are familiar with the Philip experiment, right?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that one.
Oh my gosh. Okay, great. So I'm going to bring up that chapter because I want to get all the proper nouns right.
Yeah.
But the Philip experiment was a psi experiment that was carried out by Canadian parapsychologists in 1972. Mm-hmm. Psychologist Joel Witten got together with a group of these parapsychologists, and they decided that they're going to basically fabricate a backstory for a child named Philip Aylesford. And they completely crafted this fictional backstory that he was born in 1624, and he was in all sorts of different historical events. He spied for King Charles II. He was in the English Civil War. And they actually started engaging in seances trying to call upon this fictional character, and they ended up getting things like vibrations that were captured on audio and video recordings. The table would levitate. They had echoes, felt presences, raps, and you know, these raps would answer questions correctly about the fictional backstory that they made for this ghost.
Right.
Which is just like the most mind-blowing concept that might be the way a lot of this stuff works. And I think it's really tied into the idea of sigils and to the idea of something, you know, being imbued with so much power, even if it has nothing of substance behind it, still being given power by our reality, by our minds, by our will, by whatever. Right. Again, another example of why, like, psi is the hill that Josh will die on. Because it's so well documented, and it's one of those things that once you establish that that's a thing, that's a real thing, then it opens up the door for everything else. Yeah. Like literally everything else. I mean, it's sort of the central thesis of Alex Tsakiris's book, Everything, Science is Wrong About Everything. Is that, you know, once you have that variable in play, then like you literally can't guarantee the temperature at which water will boil. Right. Yeah. Because if consciousness has an effect, then it throws like everything out the window. Yeah. And that's been my problem with the extraterrestrial establishment, is that, you know, you have these people who are hardline extraterrestrial hypothesis, advocates.
Yeah.
And then they'll be like, but yeah, the aliens totally have telepathy.
Right.
And the aliens totally can talk to your dead loved ones. It's like, wait a minute. Let's,
Right.
Let's not in the true spirit of the actual meaning of Occam's razor. Let's not multiply factors unnecessarily here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, yeah, I think looking back in my book selling work, I had seen that something about the Philip experiment, but now I definitely have to find it again and read it.
Yeah, there's an entire book that I have not read on it. Yeah, it really is one of those amazing things that I kind of wish I could get a group of people together to recreate.
Right.
Because it should be replicable.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think maybe some people actually have, but it's something that I would like to see become a lot more widespread.
Yeah, just creating all these fictional people. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that sort of ties into this idea. I mean, the sort of Jungian idea that ideas have people instead of people having ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which, again, you can also see reflected in the way that some writers of fiction have actually encountered their characters, supposedly. That famous anecdote with Alan Moore and John Constantine, you know, or I can't remember the guy who created the Shadow radio series, but he apparently would see like a shadowed figure with a big fedora like moving through his house. Yeah. Which is, again, just another absolutely lovely idea. But you talk to people who write fiction well for a living, and a lot of times they'll say, like it's just on autopilot. Like I had a plan, or even I had a plan for this character, and they decided that they were doing something differently.
Right. Yeah.
And that's just, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about that idea.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah, no, I've definitely heard instances of sort of people creating thought forms and stuff like that. And man, that gotta read more on that experiment. That's amazing. It's kind of like the glue for all this stuff, I think.
Yeah.
You got to be careful. You go too far deep on Reddit, and you're going to wind up with 16-year-old boys making tulpas to give them hand jobs.
Oh,
right. Yeah. That's. Yeah, we don't want to be there.
Yeah. But I think there's something to it. I'm letting my hair down a little bit tonight.
Yeah. Hey, this is the one.
That's what I figured. This
is the end of the road here.
Yeah. What do you think? So we did an episode on the Philadelphia experiment. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
And that was, I feel like that's where we really got into that idea of like a hoax becoming like this entire like thing. Because more or less it was just like Carl Allen, kind of. And there's documentation to back up some of the stuff, but like the life of it is this hoaxer, right? Like. Who knows? But the annotator, right?
Yeah. I really haven't dug too deep in the Philadelphia experiment stuff either.
Yeah,
that's another blind spot of mine.
It's great stuff.
But again, it's partially because it's one of those things. It's like there's just so much nonsense out there. It's hard to figure out, what actually happened.
Yeah, we use the Valet like article, I guess it was, just like debunking the whole thing. And I guess, I'm pretty familiar with his work, but I guess that was sort of during his debunking kind of phase,
Yeah, I also think of from the perspective of like the downfall of Jessup is how we approached it. And I think when you look into it that way, Carl Allen, sort of the progenitor of the conspiracy itself, just seems like a rabid dog creating this hoax that just like blossoms in all these directions where like the Navy gets their hands on it, and then it sort of becomes this large conspiracy, and it's prodding in so many people's lives. But it began as just like this kind of like, bored guy, Yeah,
it's kind of like I kind of put the Philadelphia experiment. For some obvious reasons in terms of the people that are involved, but like it kind of has that Montauk sort of feel to it as well.
Yeah.
I think you could like lift a lot of the stuff that you just said about Philadelphia experiment and put it onto the Montauk stuff.
Yeah, and I think they're
linked. But again, I'm not saying that nothing happened with them, with Montauk. But
yeah, but it has that air about it. Yeah, the sort of the hoaxy kind of air. I don't know.
Or at least the the exaggeration kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
I'm pretty convinced that the government has. Well, I don't even need to be pretty convinced if you look at stuff like Project Stargate, but I'm relatively convinced that the government has been well involved with psi experiments. Some of them really fucking icky psi experiments.
Of course,
right?
Some of them with children. You know, that seems like sort of a foregone conclusion at this point.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, that's in Whitley Strieber's book too, right? He talks about that in the Secret School.
Secret School. I think.
Yeah. So
I mean, it's funny. Like people, you know, you run into normies again. Not to be so disparaging, but you run into normies who are all into Stranger Things, and you kind of want to grab them and shake them and be like, "It's a documentary." Like it really is. It really is.
Yeah.
So much of that stuff was, I think, I've heard some people, you know, refer to it as a limited hangout.
Yeah.
Or telling tales out of school, something along those lines, and it really does have that feeling, especially with, you know, it was supposed to be originally named Montauk. It was supposed to
right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
But I will say one regret of these two Bigfoot books is that the invisible Bigfoot running around the Montauk base did not make it into either volume.
Yeah.
That's a shame.
Yeah, that's.
I just couldn't find a good place for it. You know.
Yeah.
Maybe you got to go out to Fire Island or something. Just that's where your field research begins. Start walking around Long Island.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, if I lived within you know 2 hours of Renner, I'd be there every other weekend, going someplace and doing some stuff.
Yeah. I guess he's pretty close to us. I mean, we're in Pennsylvania, so eventually we might try and see if he wants to get on the pod. We'll see.
Like south central around that Lancaster area.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I want to do so much more stuff with local lore and listening to his stuff. Seems like we got to try and have him on, definitely.
Yeah.
He's really great at it. I mean, I said this in the foreword to one of his books that I wrote for him. But I'll never forget. Like I was going to get like my watch fixed at Macy's or something, and I was going through my podcast. So it was his first appearance on Where Did the Road Go? And I saw that it was like a guy who was into local folklore and like legend tripping, and I'm like, you know, I don't need, you know, it's like to me like the local like small town, you know, we're doing ghost tours in Halloween. It's like being an alcoholic and somebody giving you mouthwash. It's like, come on, like this is not what I want at all. Yeah. You know, I mean, I'll drink it, right? Because, but it's not what I want at all. So I almost like completely skipped it, but I listened to him, and he's so good at really getting to the bottom of things in an area. And I mean, it helps that his area is really fucking weird.
Right.
Because it is. I mean, you can just sort of feel it in that entire area, and the number of stories from the area are just, you know, manifold.
Yeah.
But he really does such a good job of doggedly, you know, tracking stuff down and you know, the boots on the ground thing. I mean, I think that, I know I'm at least a little bit biased, but I do think that Strange Familiars is probably the closest thing to the serial podcast of paranormal podcasts with all its on location stuff. It just puts you in the moment.
Yeah.
A little bit better. So
yeah.
Here, sorry, the Bigfoot power couple. Half of the Bigfoot power couple's gushing over here.
Yeah.
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 But yeah, it was a match made in heaven, and it was his idea. So I was like, okay, I guess I wasn't going to write again for a while, but he pulled me back out. So
right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's how it happens. Just weird like meetings, circumstances. Yeah.
And now I've got like 4 projects in the pipeline and no time to do any of them. So
right.
I'm back on the wagon, I guess.
Yeah.
Have you done much other collaboration?
No, this is my first collaboration, and you know, I kind of had this idea at the beginning that it would be, you know, lots of times when you read books that are about like two authors, like they don't really have any attribution to who did what, and it's all sort of passed back and forth. And there was some of that, definitely. But we just ended up just saying, like, just divvying up topics and going chapter by chapter. But again, like, he would punch up my stuff and I'd punch up his stuff, and I'd, you know, hear about something on a podcast and be like, oh, this really, you know, text him that day, like, you need to go listen to this and you know, pick this up. So this is my collaboration with him. I'm I'm working on the final passovers, the final edits on a series of essays of theories on film. Which should be probably released sometime early next year.
Awesome.
Oh yeah.
But you know, so I worked with Tim on these 2 books, and I'm working with these essayists on this other book, and I was talking with my wife, and I'm like, I'm gonna do a solo one this time. Like, I just kind of want to be back on my own schedule, and
Yeah.
And part of that's my own self-conscious, like, because I go back and I like fix things that people have written. I'm like, am I being an asshole or not? I don't know, but like, I really want it to be really want it to be worded this way. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I got a couple irons in the fire. Staying busy. That's for sure.
Yeah. So we have a question from friend of the pod, Caroline, and she asked, has there ever been an account of Bigfoot driving a car?
I'm not going to say no. Okay. I'm not going to say no, because as soon as I do, we'll find one. We didn't run across one, but there's got to be. I just feel like there's got to be something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, some of my favorite stories in the first book are these stories of people who will see like a UFO and it'll have like this transparent canopy, and there's like a Bigfoot sitting at the wheels trying to drive, and he's like all hunched over.
Yeah.
There are a couple of stories like that, which is what I think of, Bigfoot driving a car. But I mean, there are sightings of Bigfoot wearing clothes.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I have to imagine that somewhere that's happened.
Well, there was like a lot of wild man sightings with like sort of clothes initially, right?
Yeah, part of the problem is that the Bigfoot community never really sort of embraced the wild man stories as being a Bigfoot story.
Mm-hmm.
They would do one of a couple of things, like they just look at them and say, "Oh, it's yellow journalism," or they'd say, it was tall tale, or it was about like a hermit or something. And some of the stories are obviously about people who are hermits and whatnot. But yeah, there's a lot of those wild man stories. They have, not only do they have clothes, but they'll have some sort of tool or farming implement. And it's really interesting. Tim and I came up with this point of comparison. So, the UFO phenomena obviously recontextualizes itself through history. I mean, I think it's pretty apparent. You have like, hot air balloons and airships from Magonia, and then, in the medieval times, and then Art Deco flying saucers into black triangles, into this new trend that we're seeing in the 21st century of these, apparent plasma balls flitting around. And so it's almost on the spectrum of keeping a pace with mankind, just one step ahead. It's going from unsophisticated to sophisticated. And interestingly, you can kind of map that wild man archetype as sort of the inverse. Back in medieval times, the wild man was sort of like an all-knowing, almost all-knowing magical being that was articulate and could and then you move into, and of course this is all very Western European, so nobody get offended, please, but because this really doesn't embrace the indigenous side of things. But from that Western European immigrant standpoint, so you have those, the wild man, the Wadwos, the green man, all those archetypes. And then you have this, 18th and 19th century wild man that is getting hairier, not hairier, but he's still covered with hair, but he's like still got some vestiges of civilization. He's got, some clothing on, and he's carrying a pitchfork or an old musket or something. And then, you hit the 20th century, and it's all these just giant monkey men. So it's the spectrum from sophisticated to primitive, while the UFO phenomena is from primitive to sophisticated. So I don't know if there's really anything to that. And like I said, that really tosses out a ton of indigenous testimony from Native Americans. So that might not be an exact match, but I think it's interesting, worth pointing it out, at least in terms of like popular consciousness, if nothing else.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's always fascinated me. I mean, and that inverse thing, that's so strange. I wonder.
Yeah.
I wonder what's going on there. Yeah.
That's just the thing. It's like you can. We're really good at making observations. It's just trying to figure out what the hell they mean is impossible.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, the mystery is what keeps people interested, I guess, right?
I mean, I don't. So whenever I talk to people, it sounds super judgy, but it's honest. whenever I talk to people, like my litmus test for whether or not there's someone whose ideas I want to be interested in are whether or not they've come to the realization that they're not going to find the answer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, if people are all about finding the answer, I'm like, okay, give yourself some time. We're not ready to have conversations yet. And that sounds elitist. I realize that sounds elitist, which is another, common bomb that was lobbed at me on Twitter. But I mean,
I think that's true though. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a level of maturity in knowing that you know nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
In all aspects of life, honestly.
Yeah.
That I don't think it should be any different in these topics either. And
right.
I don't think we'll ever know. And having said that, I would love if we would. Like, I would love if something happened tomorrow where Bigfoot was captured and like, oh, my books are completely irrelevant.
Right.
That's great. We have a Bigfoot now.
Right.
Like, but I just don't see that happening. Honestly.
Yeah, no, me either. I don't. And yeah, it's kind of like the freshman college like philosophy major effect, where like when you start learning something, you're like, I know this, and then you don't. Like by the time you're out of it, you're like, you don't know anything at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's an interesting. I'm sure that there's some sort of psychological term for that, but like,
right.
The beginning, you know nothing, and you know that you know nothing, and then you think you know everything, and then the bell curve comes back down, and a lot, but you think you perceive that you know nothing because
there's so much, and you can never contain it all. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
kind of just seems like the more you look into this stuff, the more questions that get raised.
Yeah.
And I think that we kind of bemoan the fact that that's the case, but I mean that might be literally the point of this stuff,
right? Yep.
I'm getting all sort of airy fairy artsy fartsy, but what if the point of this stuff is to make us ask questions?
Mm-hmm.
We never. So it's one of those like the medium is the message kind of concepts.
Right.
Where we're so obsessed with finding out what it means that we never question the idea that maybe the fact that we're questioning what it means is what it means.
Yeah.
It's all about, inward self-exploration.
Yeah. I think the internet's an interesting like addition to that formula too, where like everything is available to you like all the time, but like, so I think it kind of speeds up that process of like disillusionment, and like whether or not you stick around is how like earnestly interested you are in the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm wondering at what point, I saw an article talking about this, I'm wondering at what point we recognize the internet as its own organism.
Right.
Its own consciousness,
Yep.
Yeah. It's something. I mean, I don't think it's conscious, but it might be conscious in like an animistic sense, maybe in the way that like a fungus is. Sort of, yeah.
Yeah. Is it greater than the sum of its parts? I think is the real question.
Yeah.
But it's a really good analysis though when you talk about these fungal networks that are underground that communicate with each other. I think it's a really apt analogy.
Yeah.
The actual mushroom itself is simple, but the network itself is complex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and kind of subtle. There's something like about the weird subtle connections and where consciousness might form down there.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I like to imagine that people encounter certain symbols and archetypes for a reason, but then there's just some cases that are just so bizarre that it seems just ridiculous, Yeah,
I mean, that's one of the things that people wrestle with the concept of high strangeness is that they're all obsessed about what it means. But I think for me, it becomes very apparent to me after looking at this that all these things, especially the UFO phenomena, but other topics as well, are just absolutely enamored with symbolism. They're enamored with theater. At one point, amongst certain sections of fairy belief, depending who you talk to, Tir na Nog and Dreamland were the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And if you extend that sort of dream logic to a lot of these encounters, things do tend to make a lot more sense.
Right.
Especially the nonsensical bits.
Yeah.
But yeah. And it's interesting to me too how there's so you don't, if you don't pick up the telephone, you're never going to hear the call, right? So
Yeah.
it's funny to me how many people are convinced that there's nothing strange in the world because they're just waiting for the telephone to answer itself and bring itself over to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the Venn diagram of people who, don't believe in ghosts and have never spent and have spent the night in a haunted house is like two circles beside each other. Like there's very little overlap.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
if people need to be convinced, it's not that hard. It's like Gordon White. It's like Gordon White says, like, grab yourself a Ouija board and spend the night in an abandoned mental asylum, and then you'll figure it out pretty. You can't get the toothpaste back in the tube after that.
Yeah. That's great.
Just because you're sitting around waiting for it to happen to you in rush hour traffic and nothing happens doesn't give you the authority to say that there's nothing beyond our reality.
Yeah. That's.
And I'm bad about not engaging with this stuff. Like I sit here doing that exact same thing, right? Like I'm waiting for something, because for some people it seems just so effortless, I mean, Soraya is one of those cats who just like. He has stuff happen to him, like literally when he gets up to get a sandwich from the fridge, like he'll see something or hear something. It's
right.
Like, but once you start listening, you start hearing. But you gotta start somewhere. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that analogy. You got to pick up the phone first.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a little bit of a Terrence McKenna plagiarism, I think. He was talking about people who overuse psychedelics, and he's like,
you hang up the phone.
Yeah, exactly. Once you've gotten the message, you just hang up the phone. It's not that hard, people.
Great.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I guess we could hop out there.
Yeah, we could wrap it up around here.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. If y'all are fine with that, sounds. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for coming on.
I enjoy this has been a really fun one because it's just been so absolutely laid back. I got to drop some F-bombs. It's great.
Yeah.
You get to wave goodbye to Bigfoot for a little bit.
I just saw Tim Banal just sent me a story. That rascal Tim Banal just sent me a story about a guy I can't remember where it was. Let me look it up right quick. This might be worth hanging on here for a moment. A gentleman in Preston County, West Virginia, who was caring for a 5-year-old, and they did a drug test, and he was just off his face with psychedelics, and he said that and meth was, sorry, not psychedelics. The witness went on to state that Fulmer told her he was, quote unquote, tripping out all night and could hear things but didn't know where they were. Fulmer also told her that Bigfoot had waved at them and bears paraded for the 5-year-old boy to keep him calm.
Wow.
But he tested positive for amphetamine, methamphetamine, and THC.
Sounds like a decent time, minus the babysitting.
But here's the interesting thing, too, is that he and this 5-year-old, I don't know what their relationship is, were dropped off on, quote-unquote, Snake Road in Aurora, West Virginia, to go fishing at 10 a.m. And they were told to be back at the road by dark to be picked up. And the child, he lost track of the child, and they searched for the child until 2 a.m. the next day, but quote unquote, due to the search was called off due to conditions being too dangerous.
What? Wow.
So what I'm thinking when I read that, I'm like, what does that mean? Are we getting a little missing 411 here? I don't know.
Right. Wow, that's a weird one. Dang.
Huh? Is that that's like the past few days?
Yeah, very recent.
Huh?
We got breaking news on here now too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I might work that into my Strange Realities talk that I'm giving here.
Awesome. Yeah.
There's a section in Volume 2 about altered states of consciousness and Bigfoot. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Should be fun. Yeah.
Yep. Perfect for our listeners.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, of course.
And we should do this again.
Yeah,
we'd love
definitely.
to.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank
it's been
you.
great.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of fun, guys. Y'all have a nice night.
All right.
All
You
right.
too.
We'll talk soon.
All
right. See you.
Sounds good.
Bye. Well, great interview.
We're still here.
Yeah, we're still. Yeah.
Too bad nobody's ever going to hear that one.
What?
Put it in the vault.
No way.
No, I'm just kidding. That was awesome.
Yeah, great interview.
Do check out all of Josh's books.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff in there.
totally.
And he's obviously, all over the board on this stuff, which is great. He's not just refined to writing a Bigfoot book or a book about ufology. He's really just digging into the high strangeness of it all.
Yeah, I think he's an honest, interested person, and there's not much dogma in his thing. I mean, and the fairy approach to it is super interesting, and I personally love that whole the fairy world stuff. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're going to find a lot of the fairy lore stuff, which is definitely a specialty and interest of his.
Yeah,
and we certainly love that stuff.
Yeah,
I love just his perspective on it, staying agnostic.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you kind of have to.
Yeah, keep it cool, or keep yourself on ice.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's going to be it for us.
Right.
We'll be back soon.
Yeah.
Watch out
for the Bigfoot out there.
Yeah, stay away from that little pocket of West Virginia for now, I suppose.
Yeah. Really.
These things don't usually double back, though.
Yeah.
Who knows? Unless it's the next Skinwalker Ranch.
Bigfoot podcast over.
No, I'm sorry. Sorry to paraphrase Tom DeLonge. Fuck yeah.
Sick.
Well, that's good news.
Thank you.